in the heart of Montana's rolling plains, where the morning mist dances across endless grasslands, and the Rocky Mountains stand like ancient guardians on the horizon. There lived a man whose bond with his animals ran deeper than blood. Jake Morrison had been ranching these lands for over 30 years, following in the footsteps of his father and grandfather before him. But on this particular autumn morning, as golden leaves whispered secrets in the crisp air, his most trusted companion would lead him to a discovery that would shake the very foundation of everything he thought he knew about loyalty, sacrifice, and the unbreakable bonds that connect all living beings. Thunder, a majestic chestnut stallion with a white blaze running down his noble face, had been Jake's constant companion for 12 years. Together, they had weathered countless storms, both literal and metaphorical. The horse had an intelligence that seemed almost human, an intuition that had saved Jake's life more than once during treacherous mountain rides and unexpected blizzards. If you're ready to discover what Thunder found beneath that bridge that brought an entire community to tears, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell, because this story will change how you see the incredible intelligence and compassion of animals forever. The RAFTO the morning of October 15th started like any other on the Morrison Ranch. Jake stepped out of his weathered farmhouse at dawn, his breath visible in the crisp Montana air. The wooden porch creaked under his worn boots as he surveyed his land. 2,000 acres of prime grazing territory that had been in his family since 1892. The autumn colors painted the landscape in brilliant reds and golds, and somewhere in the distance, a red-tailed hawk circled lazily above the creek that wound through his property. "Morning, Thunder," Jake called out as he approached the paddock where his prized stallion stood silhouetted against the rising sun. The horse's ears perked up immediately, and he trotted over with the enthusiasm of a dog greeting its master. Thunder wasn't just any horse. At 16 hands high, with a coat that gleamed like burnished copper, he possessed an intelligence that had consistently amazed everyone who met him. Local veterinarian Dr. Sarah Chen often remarked that in her 20 years of practice, she'd never encountered an animal with such keen awareness of human emotions and environmental changes. Jake had rescued Thunder as a 3-year-old from an abusive situation in Nevada. The horse had been severely mistreated, bearing both physical and emotional scars that took years to heal. But patience, consistency, and genuine care had transformed the traumatized animal into the most reliable partner Jake had ever known. Morning, Jake planned to check the cattle in the north pasture, a routine ride that required crossing Willow Creek via the old wooden bridge his grandfather had built in 1955. The bridge had weathered decades of Montana winters and spring floods, standing as solid as the day it was constructed. It was a familiar route they'd taken hundreds of times before. Jake saddled Thunder with practiced efficiency, noting how the horse seemed more alert than usual. His ears swiveled constantly, picking up sounds that Jake's human ears couldn't detect. Thunder's nostrils flared slightly, testing the air for scents that seemed to concern him. "What's got you so worked up, boy?" Jake murmured, running his hand along Thunder's neck. The horse's muscles felt tense beneath the smooth coat, like coiled springs ready to release. They set out across the meadow at an easy walk, with Thunder's hooves creating a rhythmic percussion against the frost-covered grass. The familiar route took them past the old apple orchard, now heavy with fruit that would soon need harvesting, then along the ridge that offered spectacular views of the crazy mountains in the distance. As they approached Willow Creek, Jake could hear the gentle babble of water over stones. The creek ran year-round, fed by mountain springs and seasonal runoff. It wasn't particularly wide or deep, but the crossing had always been made via the bridge rather than fording the water, especially during spring when snowmelt turned the peaceful stream into a rushing torrent. But as they neared the familiar wooden structure, Thunder's behavior changed dramatically. The horse's ears flattened against his head, and his steps became increasingly hesitant. Jake felt the animal's muscles bunching with tension beneath him. "Easy, Thunder, what's wrong?" Jake's voice carried a note of concern he couldn't hide. Thunder stopped completely, about 20 feet from the bridge, his head held high, nostrils flaring. He began to back up, something he had never done in all their years together. The horse's eyes showed white around the edges, a clear sign of distress in equines. Jake dismounted and approached Thunder's head, speaking in soothing tones. "What is it, boy? It's just the old bridge. We've crossed it 1,000 times." But Thunder would not be calmed. When Jake tried to lead him forward by the reins, the horse planted his feet and refused to budge. His entire body trembled with an anxiety that seemed almost human in its intensity. Jake had heard stories of animals sensing earthquakes or storms before humans could detect them. He'd witnessed thunder's uncanny ability to predict weather changes and sense the mood of other animals or people. But this level of distress was unprecedented. Looking at the bridge, Jake could see nothing obviously wrong. The wooden planks appeared solid, the support beams looked intact, and the railings stood straight and true. A few autumn leaves had collected on the surface, and morning dew made the wood glisten in the early sunlight. "All right, Thunder, I hear you," Jake said finally, his voice gentle but puzzled. "If you don't want to cross, we won't cross." But even as he spoke those words, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that Thunder was trying to communicate something urgently important. The horse's behavior wasn't fear. It was more like a desperate attempt to convey a message that Jake couldn't yet understand. As they stood there in the crisp morning air, with the sound of flowing water below and the distant call of a meadowlark somewhere in the grass, Jake made a decision that would change everything. Instead of forcing the issue or finding another route, he would trust Thunder's instincts completely. "Show me what's wrong, boy," he whispered, his hand resting on Thunder's neck. "I'm listening." The INVSTHI, Kiowan Jake Morrison had learned long ago that when Thunder communicated, it was worth paying attention. The horse had an almost supernatural ability to sense danger, whether it was an approaching storm that weather forecasts missed, a cow in distress somewhere on the vast ranch, or even changes in Jake's own health that he hadn't yet recognized. 3 years earlier, Thunder had refused to enter the barn one evening, pawing the ground and whinnying with unusual agitation. Jake had dismissed it initially, but Thunder's persistence led him to discover a family of skunks that had taken up residence in the corner stall. Another time, the horse had repeatedly nudged Jake toward the truck when he was feeling fine, only for Jake to discover hours later that he was coming down with pneumonia. Now, standing before the bridge with Thunder's obvious distress, Jake felt that familiar tingle of intuition that told him to trust his companion's judgment completely. "Okay, Thunder, you've never been wrong before," Jake murmured, his weathered hand stroking the horse's neck. "Let's figure out what's got you so spooked." Jake tied Thunder's reins to a sturdy fence post about 30 feet from the bridge, close enough that the horse could watch, but far enough away that he seemed to relax slightly. Thunder's ears remained forward, alert, but the trembling in his muscles subsided somewhat. Walking toward the bridge alone, Jake examined it with the careful eye of someone who had maintained ranch structures for 3 decades. The wooden planks felt solid under his boots. He tested each one individually, bouncing slightly to check for give or weakness. The support beams underneath appeared intact, and the metal bolts holding everything together showed normal wear, but no signs of failure. "I don't see anything wrong, Thunder," Jake called back to his horse. But Thunder responded with a low, rumbling whinny that sounded almost like disagreement. Jake knelt on the bridge and peered through the gaps between the planks. Willow Creek flowed lazily below, its clear water revealing smooth stones and the occasional flash of a trout darting between shadows. Nothing seemed out of place, but as Jake prepared to stand up, Thunder let out a sharp, urgent neigh that made him freeze. The horse was looking directly at him, then toward the bridge, then back at him again, a clear pattern of communication that Jake had learned to recognize over the years. "You want me to look more carefully?" Jake asked, feeling slightly foolish for talking to a horse, but knowing from experience the Thunder seemed to understand far more than most people realized. This time, instead of examining the bridge structure itself, Jake climbed down the embankment to get a view from underneath. The slope was steep and covered with loose rocks and autumn leaves, requiring careful footing. As he made his way down toward the creek bed, he could hear Thunder moving restlessly above his hoofs, creating a nervous rhythm on the hard ground. From this new angle, Jake could see the full underside of the bridge. The original construction was even more impressive from below. His grandfather had built it to last, with thick timber supports and careful engineering that had withstood decades of Montana weather. But there, wedged between 2 of the main support beams, Jake spotted something that made his heart skip a beat. It was fabric. Blue fabric, partially hidden by debris and autumn leaves that had collected over time. At first glance, it might have been just trash blown by the wind. But something about the way it was positioned, the amount of material, and its protected location suggested otherwise. Jake's pulse quickened as he moved closer, carefully navigating the rocky creek bed. The water was cold against his boots as he stepped into the shallow stream to get a better angle. What he saw next made him gasp audibly. It wasn't just fabric. Tangled in the debris beneath the bridge were the unmistakable remains of a child's jacket, a small blue windbreaker with cartoon characters still faintly visible on the sleeve. and beneath it, partially hidden by years of accumulated leaves and silt, were other items: a small backpack, a plastic water bottle, and something that made Jake's blood run cold: a tiny sneaker, sized for a child no more than 7 or 8 years old. Jake's hands shook as he pulled out his cell phone, his mind racing through possibilities. How long had these items been here? Where was the child who had been wearing them? And most importantly, how had Thunder known to stop at this exact spot? The phone showed no signal, a common problem in this part of the ranch where the mountains created dead zones for cellular coverage. Jake would need to get back to the house to make calls, but he couldn't leave this scene. Not now, not with the implications of what he'd found weighing on his heart. He climbed back up the embankment, his legs trembling with more than just physical exertion. Thunder was waiting for him, still tied to the fence post, but now the horse's demeanor had changed. The agitation was gone, replaced by what seemed like sad understanding, as if Thunder knew that his message had finally been received. "You knew, didn't you, boy?" Jake whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You knew someone needed to be found." Thunder stepped forward and gently nuzzled Jake's shoulder, a gesture of comfort that the horse had learned over their years together. It was as if Thunder understood the weight of what they had discovered and was offering what support he could. Jake's mind raced through everything he knew about missing children in the area. He tried to remember news reports, Amber Alerts, community meetings about child safety. Living on a remote ranch, it was easy to miss local news. But surely, something as serious as a missing child would have reached him somehow. As he stood there, in the crisp autumn air, with Thunder's warm breath visible in small puffs, and the sound of the creek flowing peacefully below, Jake realized that this discovery would change everything, not just for him, but potentially for a family somewhere who had been living with the agony of not knowing what had happened to their child. The weight of responsibility settled on his shoulders like a heavy blanket. He needed to contact the authorities immediately, but he also needed to preserve the scene and make sure nothing was disturbed before law enforcement could arrive. "We need to get help, Thunder," Jake said, his voice steady despite the emotions churning inside him. "And we need to do it right." The Irrevulatio and the ride back to the ranch house felt like the longest 20 minutes of Jake Morrison's life. Every step Thunder took seemed to echo with the weight of their discovery, and Jake found himself constantly looking over his shoulder toward the bridge, as if the items beneath it might somehow disappear if he looked away too long. Thunder seemed to sense the urgency and gravity of the situation. The horse moved with purpose, his usual leisurely ranch pace replaced by a steady, determined gait that covered ground efficiently, without causing unnecessary jostling, for his deeply troubled rider. When they reached the house, Jake's hands shook. As he dialed 911, the dispatcher, a woman named Margaret, whom Jake had known peripherally through community events, listened with professional calm as he described the discovery. "Jake, I need you to stay exactly where you are and not return to the site until our officers arrive," Margaret instructed. "Sheriff's Department and the state police are being notified. Can you give me precise directions to the location?" As Jake provided detailed directions to the bridge, he found himself glancing repeatedly at Thunder, who stood patiently by the paddock fence. The horse's behavior remained calm now, but alert, as if he understood that his job was done, but remained ready to help however he could. Within 40 minutes, Jake heard the sound of multiple vehicles approaching down the long gravel drive that led to his ranch. Sheriff Tom Bradley, whom Jake had known since high school, led a convoy that included 2 state police cruisers, the county coroner's van, and a vehicle he didn't recognize that turned out to belong to FBI agent Lisa Martinez, who specialized in missing persons cases. "Jake," Sheriff Bradley said, his weathered face grave with concern, "show us exactly what you found, but don't touch anything." The group made their way across the meadow, with Thunder following at a respectful distance. Jake noticed how the horse's ears were constantly moving, tracking sounds and activity, as if he were monitoring the entire situation. At the bridge, Agent Martinez took charge of the scene with professional efficiency. She photographed everything from multiple angles before carefully beginning the process of recovering the items from beneath the structure. "The preservation is remarkable," she commented to Sheriff Bradley as she worked the location protected. "These items from direct weather exposure. We should be able to extract DNA and possibly fingerprints." As the afternoon wore on, Jake found himself answering detailed questions about his discovery, Thunder's behavior, and his knowledge of the local area. Agent Martinez was particularly interested in Thunder's reaction. In 20 years of law enforcement, she told Jake, I've seen search dogs locate remains and evidence, but I've never heard of a horse detecting something like this from above ground. Your horse may have sensed something we can't even measure. Yet, Dr. Sarah Chen, the local veterinarian, arrived as part of the investigative team to examine Thunder and document his behavior. She had worked with law enforcement before, consulting on cases where animals had provided crucial evidence or assistance. Thunder's reaction suggests he detected something through scent, sound, or possibly even subtle changes in air currents. Dr. Chen explained to the assembled group, horses have incredibly sensitive olfactory systems, far superior to humans. They can detect chemical changes in their environment that we can't even imagine. As the investigation continued, Agent Martinez made a phone call that changed everything. When she returned to the group, her expression was both somber and relieved. I've been in contact with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, she announced. The items we've recovered match the description of clothing worn by Tommy Patterson, age 7, who disappeared from a family camping trip in this area 18 months ago. Jake felt his knees go weak. 18 months. A family had been living with the agony of not knowing what happened to their child for 18 months, and Thunder had somehow sensed the presence of evidence that could finally provide answers. The Patterson family is driving up from Billings, Agent Martinez continued. They'll need to formally identify the items, but based on the preliminary descriptions, we're confident we've found evidence related to Tommy's disappearance. Sheriff Bradley placed a supportive hand on Jake's shoulder. Jake, what you and Thunder found today, ... This is going to give that family closure they've been desperately needing. As the sun began to set behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the meadow, the investigative team prepared to transport the recovered evidence to the state crime lab. Agent Martinez approached Jake with an expression of deep gratitude. Mr. Morrison, I want you to understand what happened here today, she said. Without Thunder's instincts and your willingness to trust them, these items might never have been found. The Patterson family has been searching for their son for over a year. They've never given up hope, but they've also never had any concrete answers about what happened to him. Jake looked over at Thunder, who was grazing peacefully nearby, seemingly oblivious to the praise being directed his way. But Jake knew better. Thunder understood. Somehow, the horse had known that beneath that bridge lay evidence that could help bring peace to a grieving family. What happens now? Jake asked, his voice hoarse with emotion. Now we process everything through the lab, Agent Martinez replied. We contact the family and help them through the identification process. And we continue investigating to find out exactly what happened to Tommy Patterson. But Jake, what you need to understand is that this discovery, Thunder's discovery, is going to change everything for the Patterson family. They're going to finally have answers. As the official vehicles departed and quiet returned to the ranch, Jake stood with Thunder in the gathering twilight. The horse nuzzled his shoulder gently, as if offering comfort for the emotional weight of the day's events. You did good, boy, Jake whispered, his voice catching. You did real good. The REUNON 3 weeks after Thunder's discovery beneath the bridge. Jake Morrison received a phone call that would remain etched in his memory forever. Agent Martinez was calling with updates about the investigation, but more importantly, with a request that spoke to the very heart of what had transpired. Jake, the Patterson family would like to meet Thunder, Agent Martinez said, her voice carrying an emotion that professional training couldn't quite suppress. They want to thank him personally for what he found. The laboratory analysis had confirmed what everyone suspected. The items recovered from beneath the bridge belonged to Tommy Patterson. More importantly, the investigation had revealed that Tommy had not been the victim of foul play, but had tragically fallen from the bridge during a solo exploration while his family was setting up camp nearby. The evidence suggested he had crawled under the bridge, possibly playing or hiding, when a section of the embankment gave way, causing him to fall into the creek below. The family has closure now, Agent Martinez continued. They know what happened to Tommy. They know he wasn't taken by someone with bad intentions. He was just being a curious 7-year-old boy, and there was a tragic accident. That knowledge, as painful as it is, has given them a kind of peace they haven't had for 18 months. The meeting was arranged for a Saturday morning in November. Jake spent extra time grooming Thunder that day. Though he wasn't entirely sure why, the horse seemed to sense something significant was happening, displaying the same alert attentiveness he'd shown on the day of the discovery. The Patterson family arrived in a modest sedan, and Jake watched from his porch as they slowly got out of the car. David Patterson was a tall, thin man with prematurely gray hair and eyes that held the weight of prolonged grief. His wife, Maria, was small and dark-haired, with an air of quiet strength that spoke to her role in holding the family together through their darkest period. With them was Tommy's older sister, Emma, now 10 years old, who held her parents' hands as they approached the paddock, where Thunder waited. Jake had prepared himself for this meeting, but nothing could have readied him for the raw emotion he saw in the faces of Tommy's family. These were people who had lived through every parent's worst nightmare, who had spent 18 months not knowing if their child was alive or dead, suffering or safe. "Mr. Morrison," David Patterson said, his voice steady but thick with emotion, "Agent Martinez told us what Thunder did, how he refused to cross the bridge, how he led you to find Tommy's things." Jake nodded, feeling the inadequacy of any words he might offer. "Thunder's always been special," he said simply. "He sees things the rest of us miss." Maria Patterson stepped forward, her eyes fixed on Thunder. The horse seemed to sense her grief and approached the fence slowly, his movements gentle and deliberate. When he reached the fence line, he lowered his great head and stood perfectly still, as if offering himself for whatever comfort she might need. "Can I?" Maria asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Of course," Jake replied, opening the gate. What happened next would be talked about in the community for years to come. Maria Patterson walked up to Thunder and placed both hands on either side of his face, looking directly into his dark, intelligent eyes. For a long moment, they simply regarded each other, a grieving mother and the horse who had helped find her lost child. Then, Thunder did something Jake had never seen him do. With a stranger, the horse gently pressed his forehead against Maria's forehead, holding the contact in what could only be described as a gesture of comfort and understanding. Maria began to cry, not the harsh sobs of fresh grief, but the quiet tears of someone who had found a measure of peace. "Thank you," she whispered to Thunder. "Thank you for helping us find our boy." David Patterson and Emma joined him, and Thunder stood patiently as the family took turns touching him, speaking to him, sharing their gratitude. The horse seemed to understand the solemnity of the moment, remaining calm and gentle throughout. Dr. Sarah Chen, who had been documenting Thunder's behavior for her research into animal intuition, was present to witness the reunion. Later, she would write in her report, "I have never observed an animal demonstrate such apparent emotional intelligence and empathy." Thunder's interaction with the Patterson family suggested a level of understanding that challenges our traditional concepts of animal consciousness and compassion. As the morning progressed, the Patterson family shared memories of Tommy with Jake. They talked about his love of adventure, his curiosity about everything in the natural world, and his particular fascination with horses. "He would have loved Thunder," Emma said softly, her small hand resting on the horse's neck. "He always wanted to ride a horse like the cowboys in movies." Agent Martinez arrived later in the morning with final updates on the case. The investigation was officially closed, with Tommy's death ruled an accidental drowning. The family now had their son's remains, which had been recovered from the creek downstream from the bridge, and they could finally lay him to rest. What Thunder did, Agent Martinez addressed the gathered group. "It's going to be written up in law enforcement journals. We're going to use this case to train officers about the value of paying attention to animal behavior during investigations. Thunder may have started something that could help solve other cases. But for Jake, watching the Patterson family find comfort in Thunder's presence, the broader implications seemed less important than the immediate reality of healing happening before his eyes. As the family prepared to leave, David Patterson pulled Jake aside. "I need you to know," he said, "that what Thunder did for us, it gave us back our son. Not physically, but spiritually. We can grieve properly now. We can remember Tommy without the agony of not knowing. That's a gift we can never repay." Jake nodded, understanding. "Thunder's always been good at finding things that need to be found," he said. "I think he knew Tommy needed to come home to you." The Patterson family visits became a monthly tradition. They would come to the ranch, spend time with Thunder, and share stories about Tommy. The horse seemed to look forward to these visits, often positioning himself at the fence on the days they were expected, as if he somehow knew they were coming. 6 months after the discovery, Maria Patterson brought something special to show Thunder. It was a framed photograph of Tommy, taken just days before his disappearance. In the picture, the 7-year-old boy was grinning at the camera, his arms spread wide, as if embracing the whole world. "I wanted Thunder to see what Tommy looked like," Maria explained to Jake. "I know it sounds silly, but I think Thunder should know whose story he helped complete." Thunder examined the photograph with the same careful attention he gave to everything that seemed important to the humans in his life. Then, in a gesture that brought tears to everyone's eyes, he gently nuzzled the frame before stepping back and whinnying softly. a sound that seemed to carry both sadness and understanding. As autumn returned to Montana a year after the discovery, Jake often found himself pausing during his daily rides to look at the bridge. It had been reinforced and made safer, but it remained a powerful reminder of the day Thunder had refused to cross, leading to a discovery that changed multiple lives forever. The bridge also became a memorial site. The Patterson family, with Jake's permission, installed a small plaque near the crossing point. It read, "In memory of Tommy Patterson, whose adventurous spirit lives on in the wind across these plains, and in gratitude to Thunder, whose wisdom reminded us that love transcends all boundaries." Local residents began visiting the memorial, often bringing their own horses to meet Thunder. Word spread about the horse who could sense things beyond human perception, and Thunder became something of a local legend. But Jake was careful to protect his companion from too much attention, understanding that Thunder's gift was something to be respected, not exploited. Dr. Chen continued her research into Thunder's abilities, but she always emphasized that the horse's greatest gift wasn't supernatural. It was his deep capacity for empathy and his willingness to communicate when something was wrong. Thunder teaches us, she often said, that if we pay attention to the animals in our lives, they might teach us things we never expected to learn. On quiet evenings, as Jake and Thunder rode across the ranch in the fading light, Jake would sometimes talk to his companion about that morning when everything changed. "You knew, didn't you, boy?" he would say. "You knew that little boy needed to be found. You knew his family needed answers." Thunder would respond with a gentle whinny or a nudge of his great head, as if acknowledging the conversation, but remaining characteristically humble about his role in the miracle. The story of Thunder and the bridge spread far beyond Montana. It was featured in magazines, documentary films, and scientific journals, studying animal intelligence. But for Jake Morrison, the fame and attention was secondary to the simple truth he had always known. Thunder was special, not because of any supernatural ability, but because of his extraordinary capacity to care about others, human and animal alike. The Patterson family continued their monthly visits, finding comfort and healing in their connection with Thunder. Emma, now a teenager, often said that visiting Thunder helped her feel close to her brother. "I think Tommy would be happy," she would tell Jake, knowing that Thunder helped bring him home. And in the quiet moments, when the wind whispered across the Montana plains and Thunder stood silhouetted against the endless sky, Jake would feel a deep gratitude for the bond between human and animal that had made such healing possible. Thunder had taught him, and everyone whose lives were touched by this story, that sometimes the most profound acts of love come from simply paying attention when someone or something is trying to tell us that help is needed. The bridge still stands today, stronger than ever, and Thunder continues to cross it regularly during his rides with Jake. But now, every time they approach that spot, both horse and rider pause for a moment of quiet remembrance, honoring the memory of a little boy whose story needed to be told, and celebrating the remarkable bond between species that made that storytelling possible. This incredible story shows us the amazing intelligence and empathy that animals possess, and how trusting their instincts can lead to miracles. Thunder's story has inspired animal behaviorists worldwide, and continues to bring comfort to families dealing with loss. If this story touched your heart, please share it with others who need to hear about the unbreakable bonds between humans and animals. Subscribe for more incredible true stories that celebrate the amazing creatures who share our world. And remember, sometimes the most important messages come from those who cannot speak our language, but speak directly to our hearts.